Let me open up the discussion to the panel then. Sean, how do you feel being on the side of the devil?
I didn't think I was on the side of the devil.
But you can see what Georgia is saying, that because this technology is expensive, it is high risk, it is hyped up, there is a danger, even though we'd like a nice balance of everything, there's a danger that it's going to shove everything else out the way.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily very expensive. I mean, one of the goals of nanotechnology is actually to take things that are quite expensive now and actually make them cheaper. And so it's not necessarily that nanotechnology itself is more expensive and that we're going to pour lots of money into it. So that my take on it, it is a very complex area. I think George is quite right. And also coming back to hands, it's not easy to pick out nanotechnology and say that is nanotechnology. It's going to be part of our society. It's there, and it's not going to be easy to say that's nanotechnology and that's necessarily an alternative that we can take. It's going to be part of a more complex, of our complex society. So I don't feel on the side of the devil exactly. No. I feel that it is a grey area, and that we do have to think about it.
Let me ask you, how do you feel about the whole regulatory scheme of things, which, with all due respect, and you'd be the first to admit, would you not, doesn't exist, actually? Sure.
Look, I think it does exist. I think there's a regulatory framework there. There are some challenges about how that framework copes with nanotechnologies potentially, but we do have a framework that is designed to deal with hazards, and so when
but only after they become
hazardous,
right?
Sorry.
Only after they become hazardous.
Well, once we identify, it's not that they'll magically become. Once we identify the hazard, so that's true.
But
it's very difficult.
Anyway, Sally,
Yes.
what do you think?
I must admit, I took a little bit of issue with the idea of evidence of no harm. All through our toxicology, we are moving away from the classic kill 'em and count 'em toxicology. There are other chemicals and things that are endocrine active. We don't know yet all of the mechanisms, and we don't necessarily know what you're looking for.
Having said that, it's like the more we know, the less we know, and so paralysed do we come by how much we don't know that nothing would happen, right?
Nothing
would happen. Is this worth a little risk?
I think we need to. There are data gaps. There is also a lot of evidence, as I said earlier, in the literature around what we already know about particles. I mean, silicosis of the lungs used to kill a lot of miners. We know that inhaling lots of particles is not good for your cardiovascular system or your lungs. So there is some evidence to build on and to help us identify where those gaps are. One of the things we are missing, though, and people say research always say this, is the money. There is money to make things. There is money to do the new areas. But under our current funding system, if you want to study the toxicity of it, good luck if you can find somebody. If you know a good philanthropist, please give me their number and I'll give them a call.
No, give the number.
There just isn't the money. I can make any kind of thing I want to and quite easily probably get money for it. But to actually know where it's going to go, what it's going to do, and when I need to start working with Jamie, because it's going to enter cells or not enter cells, there is no money really to fund that.
And in fact, I'd suggest there's a disincentive for companies to do research while we've got a requirement that you not actually go through the regulatory process until there's evidence of harm. Because if you don't look, you won't find that evidence.
Interesting point that Peter was saying that some people claim to have nanoparticles in their products when they actually don't. So on the one hand, it's a marketing ploy, but on the other hand, presumably there are people who don't declare them when they ought to. How does that work?
Well, I mean, I think the short answer is that without good mandatory regulation and without detection capacity and enforcement, we don't know. But I suspect that it's likely to be far more many companies that are using nano and not declaring it in this region than are marketing as nano, whereas really it's not nano. I suspect it's different in other parts of the world, perhaps in Asia, for example, where marketing as nano may be seen to be more advantageous.
I can understand what you said about the sun cream possibly increasing the risk of cancer. What about cosmetics in general? So what if they've got nanoparticles in them? Apart from the fact that it's frivolous.
Yeah. I think, look, a lot of the concern actually exists about titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, which are the minerals used in nanoform in sunscreens and also used most widely in cosmetics. And it's for that reason that I'm concerned that they're excluded from the notification requirements under HASNO. But when it comes to other things like aluminium oxide or fullerenes or iron oxide, I think the short answer is we just don't know. We know a lot of them do produce free radicals, particularly when exposed to light, but we don't really know what the long-term health effects are going to be of a realistic use.
So that implies, not knowing, Hans, that we should slow things down until we do know more.
Well,
How would you feel?
well, actually, it's a great market for us because we make equipment that's really cheap that can measure nanoparticles to the point where we're looking to put them into high schools. So you're going from a $5 million electron microscope to a $20,000 highly precise piece of equipment. So the more people have to test everything, the more toys we sell.
You'd be in favour of massive regulation, though.
Actually, I'm not. Part of the problem is that people say if it's got nano, that makes it worse. And sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. I'm going to take issue with Sally as well. One of the fastest...
I know makeup's not frivolous at all, is it?
No, but one of the fastest growing areas of nano research is nanotoxicology. And it's a huge growth area. And you see it in the EU, the US is a little bit behind, but certainly in the EU, there's hundreds of millions of euros being poured into nanotoxicology. And
What does that mean? Studying
exactly.
the possibly toxic effects
Correct.
of...
And so we've got customers at Duke University in the US. Oxford's got a huge project. There's nanoparticles in the air. I mean, who knows that 15% of cigarette smoke is nanoparticles? You suck them into your lungs. So what's a bigger... That's a huge problem that I think is a really, really serious problem. I don't smoke, but you know, you've got nanoparticles, carbon. People worry about carbon soot, carbon nanotubes, and people are just sucking it straight into their lungs. So that to me is completely absurd, but yet we allow it. So what's more dangerous? Somebody using sunscreen or somebody smoking cigarettes? And I'd say if you weigh up the balances, I would say the net deleterious effect on health from cigarette smoke is probably orders
That's
of
such
magnitude.
a faulty argument,
No, it's
though.
not one.
Of course it
No, we
is.
allow one thing.
I mean,
It's relativity.
one knows that
I
one is
said-
smoking and killing oneself.
Correct. And
But
one
it's
should know.
slapping...
I'm actually going to take issue with that because of the best efforts of the tobacco industry to confuse us for decades.
Oh,
One didn't know
Yeah,
for
look,
a very
I-
long time.
well-
and now as we've actually got more and more consensus within the scientific community that smoking does cause health harm, we're allowing it in less and less public places. And in Australia, you can't even display the cigarettes in a shop anymore. They have to be in a cupboard. There's no more tobacco advertising, and they're labelled with very serious health warnings. So I think the experience with tobacco is actually a cautionary tale of what happens when industry can use uncertainty to confuse regulators, delay regulation. Decades down the track, now we're actually taking measures to keep people safe.
It does seem, Peter, that there is a certain pressure for more regulation and more testing in New Zealand. Would you favour putting a case to government for that?
No, not at the moment.
Why?
The legislate. Well, we'll see when this report comes out and whether they do identify.
When is it due out?
I'm not sure because it's being done by the Ministry of Science and Innovation, but so it has to go to their minister. But it may be just a month or two away. But to pick up on the point before, no, we would not agree at all that there is basically no regulatory framework in place. There is, in fact, a very robust regulatory framework, which does cover several of the areas where there may be risks from nanomaterials, not only in the chemicals area, but also in the foods and the medicines. In relation to the chemicals management area, which is the responsibility of my organisation, the New Zealand chemicals management legislation, the HASNO Act, is actually world-leading legislation in terms of management of chemicals. It covers a wider range of types of toxic properties, not just the normal, you feed it to the rat and it dies, type of toxicity. So all manner of chronic toxicity, long-term toxicity, is addressed by our system, as is a whole range of harms to the environment. The underlying premise behind the HASNO Act is that nobody can import or manufacture a new hazardous substance to New Zealand without going through our system and getting a regulatory approval. So the question is, if someone brings in a nano material that is considered to be new and considered to be hazardous.
And they tell you about it.
Well, that is the same as if people bring in any type of new chemical product. There is the requirement for people to tell us. There is great penalties if people get caught doing things without the proper approvals. 6 months in jail, $500,000 fine, and so on.
But the cosmetics have got lots of nanoparticles in them, and I don't see any of them in jail. The pushers. Do you know what I mean? I'm missing something here, Peter.
No, well, again, like I said earlier, as far as cosmetics go, apart from the titanium dioxide and the zinc oxide, and again, under the HASNO Act, once a substance or a type of product has been approved to be in New Zealand, if new evidence comes to light that indicates that these substances are harmful, are toxic, then there's a mechanism under the HASNO Act to reassess those approvals and either then ban the substances or severely restrict them. And we do that all the time in relation to nasty types of pesticides that we talked about before. So the evidence to date that regulators around the world have worked on is that titanium dioxide and zinc oxide in cosmetics is safe. If there is new, sound scientific evidence that comes to light that shows that that's not the case, well, yep, then that's when you then
So how closely are you working with the CSIRO on this?
Well, we're not specifically working with the CSIRO. We work, because we're a government regulator, we work with the fellow regulators, like in Australia there's the organisation they call NICNAS.
But just correct me if I'm wrong, are you saying that in Australia they've raised concerns about these products?
Yeah, they have, and I think it's worth noting that Europe has recently passed new laws recognising that inclusive of zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, there are sufficient concerns about the risks of nanomaterials in sunscreens and cosmetics to require most of them to go through new safety assessment and testing before they can be sold, and to face mandatory labelling of all nano ingredients. That won't take effect for another 2 years, but that comes after reviews of the safety of these ingredients because there was sufficient concern. And in Australia, we've begun a process through NICNAS consulting on ways to try to close the major legal loophole that leaves nano ingredients unregulated. And this is the key problem with the New Zealand regulation too, which is why it's completely legal for a company not to notify that it's using a new chemical. And that is that nanoforms of substances that have a history of use are not treated as a new chemical. They're treated as the same substance. So even though a company can use a nanomaterial specifically because it has novel properties and it behaves in a different way, they don't legally have to treat it as a new chemical. So it's quite legal for them not to notify, not to do new safety assessment. And we are moving to close that legal loophole in Australia, but I think it's going to take some time. And I suspect that that's a challenge that Irma's going to have too.
I don't want to pick on you, Peter, but I don't see how you can have it both ways. I don't see how you can say, well, we're waiting if anybody's got any evidence that, will. At the same time, we're not doing what other people are doing. We're behind them.
No, again, as we were talking about cosmetics, I'd totally disagree with that because our cosmetics legislation is probably more proactive and more precautionary in respect of nanomaterials than the Australian legislation. The New Zealand cosmetics legislation is totally based on the EU cosmetics legislation, and every year we update our New Zealand cosmetics legislation to...
So are we going to wait for the EU to do its assessment?
No. Oh, well, I was going to get onto that. In the recent update of the EU legislation, they have put in a requirement that nanomaterial ingredients in cosmetics must be identified on the label of the products.
Yes.
So when we put out our next round of updates to our legislation, which will probably be in about the beginning of May, one of the proposals will be, should we adopt this EU provision to require the identification of nanomaterials on labels?
And what about the safety assessment too, Peter, or are you just restricting it to labelling?
No, we do fully, pretty much fully adopt the EU approach to cosmetics. That's the way our regulation is written. But I come back to the point, if the only nanomaterials that we've sort of, if you like, accepted as being in cosmetics are the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide. And again, I mentioned, if new information comes to light, we can have a look at those.
With
If people notify
respect,
other...
I think that's completely crazy. I mean, we commissioned testing of 10 cosmetics by the Australian Microanalytic and Micro Research and Microanalytic Research Facility at Sydney Uni about 18 months ago. And that was looking at just foundations and concealers, just 10. Cost us $11,000 to get 10 products tested and only a couple of images. It's incredibly expensive. It's beyond the reach of most community groups and general members of the public who are concerned about this. Now, I raised the point of funding because I think it has to be the government that does the testing. They can't be waiting for community groups to come forward saying, we found evidence, this is in X product. But we found that there were nanoparticles of aluminium oxide, iron oxide, and other substances in those cosmetics. I suspect it's very likely that those cosmetics or similar cosmetics are sold here because we tested L'Oreal, Revlon, all of the big name brands. And I think if the government isn't doing its own testing, then it's impossible to claim that those products aren't here.
Can I also comment on that? Because the story behind titanium dioxide is quite interesting. How it got found that it might be of concern in sunscreen was actually because roofs in Australia were being destroyed. So the colour steel people thought they had a faulty batch of roofs. So they replaced them because these roofs were being degraded within a matter of months when they had a 30-year guarantee. And after they'd replaced a few too many, they sent someone out to have a look. And the person said, you know what, you're going to think I'm crazy, but these are handprints. And what it was the sunscreen, that particular sunscreens that the roof installers were using, wherever they put their hands on the roof, because it was photochemically active, was destroying the roof. So this wasn't done through tox testing. This was another industry getting a little bit grumpy because something bad was happening to their product. So now Colour Steel actually specifies which sunscreen you're allowed to use if you're installing their roofs and you want your lifetime guarantee. So some of the ways we're going to find things aren't going to be through the conventional routes. So people are going to need to be aware, and that's why a lot of people, it's going to have to be interdisciplinary teams that consider this, from the people who make and want to use nanomaterials to the end users, to people who say, hey, that looks a bit odd. I've never seen that before in a test, but that's a bit weird, because that might be the important thing. While we work through what is important and what is not.